You left me where the living forget the dead. I left you a different kind of death, waiting. The smell of disinfectant still crawls through my lungs every night. The clock on the wall never stops ticking, like it's counting down to something only I know. They said, "It's better for you here, Dad. You'll be taken care of." Then they drove away before the door even closed. I remember the sound of their tires fading, the silence swallowing me whole. That was the moment I died, or at least, that's what they thought. But death is quiet. Revenge isn't. I had nothing left but time. Time to remember every lie they told, every signature they forged, every time they looked me in the eyes and smiled while stealing everything I built. So I started recording. Faces, voices, secrets, little pieces of rot wrapped in family smiles. One of them begged me on his knees once, tears and snot dripping down his face, whispering, "Please, Dad, forgive me." I pressed play instead. The tape did all the talking. Forgiveness is power, and I learned how to weaponize it. They thought leaving me here was the end of my story. They didn't realize it was the beginning of theirs, their slow, silent execution. Stay with me until the end, because the last tape, the one they never knew existed, is the reason they died. Waiting for my forgiveness. If you can stomach what comes next, hit play. This story deserves witnesses. I was a contractor for 30 years, poured concrete, framed houses, stayed late to fix the things that fell apart. My hands knew work, my mouth knew jokes to make my wife laugh. We had a small house on the corner, a garage full of tools, and 2 kids who grew up on peanut butter sandwiches and Sunday afternoon Little League. When Mary died, the house became all I had left that felt like her. I thought my children would be my family. I thought I'd grow old surrounded by them. They taught me how wrong I was. My oldest, Mark, always had that sharp look, the kind that sizes up a deal and never blinks. He wanted more than the life I built. He wanted status, a house in a better zip code, a corner office. Lisa, my daughter, wore kindness like a coat she could take off when it rained. She was soft in public, but she stepped around me in the house like I was a puddle she'd rather avoid. Evan, the youngest, had a quietness that settled in the room like smoke. You could feel something dangerous under it if you paid attention. At first it was small things. Mark borrowed my truck for a weekend and never asked. Lisa managed the bills and then told me the mortgage was late, a mistake they'd fix. Evan started saying things no son should say to his father, like, "Dad, it's time you stopped pretending you're okay." They smiled while signing papers. They smiled while moving boxes out of my garage. The smiles were sharp. Then they took the house. They doctored documents, signatures I'd made in a rush at the hospital, a power of attorney that suddenly looked like my handwriting and yet had pages I never read. They sold things off in the night. Tools my father gave me, Mary's old tea set. The final act was cold and clinical. Late one morning, 2 lawyers arrived with polite expressions and an ambulance with canvas straps. They called it a finding of incapacity. They signed the consent while I sat in a chair, too confused and too tired to argue. They packed my bag. They left me with a toothbrush and a thin blanket. And they left with the keys. I was a father. They turned me into a burden. What they didn't know, what no family member could ever imagine, was that I had been listening. I learned how to set a small recorder to catch a laugh, a promise, a threat. I learned where cameras hide in plain sight. I made a new will the night I suspected. Not cruel, not capricious, but deliberate. These things sound like the play of a desperate old man, but they are the instruments of a plan. I do not tell you this to boast. I tell you so you understand. I was not helpless. The door closed with a sound that still lives in me. Not a bang, but the finality of someone locking a story away. I remember the polite faces, Mark's jaw tight, Lisa's eyes pretending concern, Evan's hands folded like he was waiting for a cue. 2 lawyers slid a sheaf of papers across the kitchen table. "Sign here," they said, voice smooth as oil. I signed on shaky lines, the pen scratching like a mourner. An EMT folded a blanket into a plastic bag. They packed my life in brown boxes while I watched, breath shallow, throat full of words I wouldn't say. Fear hit first, the old animal kind that makes your hands cold. Shame followed, warm and hot, at the thought that my blood had traded my bed for a ward and my name for a checkbox. But the shame burned into something else, A quiet, precise winter. The shock receded and left me clear-eyed. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I folded my anger into planning. If they wanted me gone, I would give them a different death, one that eats a person from the inside out. I learned that forgiveness can be sharpened. I would make forgiveness into a weapon, and I would make them die waiting for it. The first poison I fed them was rumor dressed up like paperwork. I learned long ago that families dissolve fastest when they stop trusting each other, so I made them stop. It began with one email. Forged, obviously, but convincing in the small ways that matter. The banker's name misspelled in one line, an attachment with a PDF stamp that looked real if you didn't squint. I leaked a contract that offered Mark a private sale of a parcel of land. His name in bold where only his should have been. I sent Lisa a forwarded message that implied Evan had been siphoning funds into an account nobody knew about. Little things, seeded through the right hands, with enough verifiable detail to make suspicion look like fact. They called each other, voices frayed. Accusations arrived like late-night texts. Did you take that money? Why would you do that? Their messages multiplied. Screenshots, threats, pleas. Friends overheard fragments and passed them on. I listened to them unravel on the phone, a sound I had missed for years. In the nursing home hallway, I could hear each tone echo like a knell. The twist came quick. Mark, who'd always trusted his instincts, stopped being patient. He started sending obscene messages to my sister-in-law, then to Evan, then to me. Threats masked as bravado. He withdrew cash from accounts I'd never thought he'd touch, and dragged a deed out of storage to sell before anyone could stop him. The calm, calculating son I'd known became reckless, making moves that left fingerprints, the exact sort of mistakes a planted doubt will produce when it metastasizes. Doubt spilled into panic, and panic eats sense. That was the point. Once they suspected each other, they would stop looking together. They would look at each other like enemies, and I'd let them. Money is a language everyone understands. Once doubt had them speaking in accusations, I switched to threats they couldn't ignore. I set up calls that looked like they came from attorneys, notices about liens, tax queries, false audits that referenced the very properties they were fighting over. I arranged for a notice of default to hit Lisa's inbox on a Monday morning, the day she had payroll to cover for her boutique. I arranged for a clerical error to appear on Mark's construction loan, a discrepancy large enough to trigger an automatic hold. Small bureaucracies are merciless. A single flag number can freeze an account, and once frozen, desperation follows. I watched them at bank counters. The lines, the polite forms, the cashier's soft, "I'm sorry, sir." I heard the gulp when balances showed red. The sound made a rhythm in my head like the slow turning of a key. Mark sold the truck he'd always boasted about, but it wasn't enough. Lisa panicked, withdrew from a retirement account in a nap, selling off stocks that had been steady for years. Evan, who'd prided himself on being detached, took a loan against Mary's locket, the one I'd promised to keep. The twist, in the chaos, Mark attempted to speed things up. He forged a signature on a deed to move money quickly, convinced he could outmaneuver whatever audit I'd arranged. He called in a notary friend who owed him a favor, but haste left traces: mismatched ink, a stamp with the wrong date. A neighbor tipped a reporter. I'd arranged for the reporter to be curious. When the forgery came to light, the accusation ricocheted back at them with more force than any tax notice. Greed had made them sloppy, and sloppiness makes enemies of the law. Money destabilized them. The ledger of trust eroded into a ledger of liabilities, and with the liabilities came open wounds, ripe for what I planned next. Paper will wrinkle, money will vanish. What destroys people is truth in front of an audience. I had cameras where they thought there were only picture frames. I'd learned to place a recorder in the little things people used to forget existed. A clock with a hollow back, a humidifier with a secret compartment. I let family visits happen with a quiet microphone tucked into the hem of a table runner. I let them come to my side of the nursing home cafeteria and perform contrition for the CCTV. They said the words they thought would fix everything. "We're sorry, Dad. We messed up. It was only for your good." They said it while their hands were still sticky with deeds and bills. Those voices felt different off a speaker. They were smaller, tinny, unvarnished. The laughter that followed apologies, the private remarks, "He's senile. He won't remember," cut through the performative softness like knives. I compiled the clips into short labeled files. Mark, sells truck. Lisa, mortgage lie. Evan, he's done. I sent them anonymously to relatives, to a wedding planner who once bragged about their integrity, to a pastor known for discretion. Gossip is a blunt tool. Put it in the right hands and it becomes a wrecking ball. The twist landed harder than I expected. Evan, who had kept his head down, snapped. He staged a denial from his office and released a public statement saying we were fabricating evidence for sympathy. His employer, a company with a zero-tolerance media policy, saw the statement and, in the wrong place at the wrong time, judged it a liability. A week later, Evan's desk was empty, and his colleagues told the press he left voluntarily. The denial backfired. The truth I'd spread held weight because it came with timing and witnesses. Their faces on the footage matched the faces at the center of the scandal. They had tried to hide under reputation. I pulled that rug. Truth exposed them. Once the masks fell, shame followed. And shame is a contagion I was happy to let loose. People speak loudly in front of their children, thinking small ears hear only small things. That's a mistake families make when they're comfortable. I weaponized what they assumed was safe. I found the birthdays, the weekends, the little rituals they used to keep themselves imagined as good parents. I wrote letters to the schools addressed in the names of the grandchildren, innocent-sounding notes about parental availability and visitation concerns. I had someone friendly at the PTA casually mention that there was tension at home and that one child had been acting withdrawn. A teacher called a meeting. A cousin forwarded a flyer. A guardian named a day and didn't show. The children, who had once run to hug me, began asking questions I refused to answer. Guilt slipped into my children's voices when they called and asked about their kids. That was when I knew the squeeze worked. Then I sent a sealed envelope to the youngest spouse, a photograph that suggested a truth they had not been told about their child's parentage, a DNA test sent to the wrong address years ago, a name on a registry that didn't match the family tree. The revelation came like an acid burn. Marriages shifted. Trust, once a foundation, began to crack under the pressure of secrets I revealed selectively. The twist, Mark's wife, who had always stood by him, found a note in her purse, a voicemail I'd arranged to be delivered from a woman claiming old favors and older debts. She left that night. Lisa's husband threatened custody suits. Evan's partner, frightened by the sudden glare on their family, packed a bag and drove away. The fractures I seeded widened into chasms. They had thought they could use their children as shields. I turned those shields into mirrors that reflected everything ugly back at them. They had stolen my home. Now I stole their certainty. After hunger and panic, people beg the most. Forgiveness is the final currency. I pretended to accept their coin. I announced, quietly and through the nurse who liked to gossip, that I was open to meeting my family. It was modest phrasing. It made them desperate. I told them I wanted to hear apologies in person. Nothing legal, nothing televised, but I insisted that it be genuine and that their words be recorded for memory. I suggested a time, a date, and the presence of a social worker as witness. They arrived in suits and shiny shoes, eyes rimmed and mouths rehearsed. What followed was exquisite theater. Mark cried, which made Lisa sob, which made Evan stammer. Their voices quivered with real fear, the kind that appears when a person knows the floor might give way. I told them to say the words loudly for my records. They did. I'm sorry, I was selfish. I failed you. Each apology went into a microphone I'd tuned. Each confession saved in clearer fidelity than any camera previously captured. Then I handed them a plate of photographs, pictures of the items they'd sold, with receipts, dates, and buyer names. The social worker looked up, puzzled. I let them watch the recognition dawn. At the moment when they were most vulnerable, I pressed a button. Every confession, every "please forgive me," played back over the speaker system in the nursing home common room. Echoes amplified into humiliation. Visitors turned, nurses paused, a tea cart rolled away. They had expected leniency, a balm. Instead, I published their contrition where everyone could hear it. They weren't only exposed, they were shamed publicly, forced into immediate consequence, A lost friend here, a neighbor's cold shoulder there. The money they had scraped together to bribe a few favors evaporated in the scramble to repair reputations. The twist: the footage and recordings were also simultaneously sent to lines that mattered. A charity that had once refused Mark's bid for a sponsorship, a church that had considered Lisa a benefactor, Evan's old company. By the time they left, their apologies had become indictments broadcast into networks they slept inside of. Forgiveness had become a trap with a very loud door. Finally, I unfurled the legal web I'd been weaving while they argued and fled. People are blind to fine print when they're busy saving face. I made fine print my hammer. I arranged for a reading that was really a reveal. A neutral lawyer, cameras for the record because of family interest, and a notary who owed me an old favor. I had written the will so that every clause looked ordinary until read aloud. The twist in the clauses was procedural. A set of conditions that required public acts of restitution in exchange for any monetary distribution. Want the house? Publicly take responsibility for the fraud. Want the assets? Care for me in person for 90 consecutive days, recorded and retract prior claims publicly under oath. They signed initial receipts of understanding, hungry and certain they could comply. Of course they rushed to agree. Desperation makes people contract like cliffs fold, but I'd also built into the will a final check. Any attempt to hide the document, bribe an official, or destroy evidence would nullify all claims and trigger an automatic binding transfer to a charity under my control. The kind of charity that would use the money in ways that stung them most. A shelter named for Mary that specialized in housing elderly victims of exploitation. The twist exploded when Mark, terrified of public shame, convinced Evan to hide the original will and substitute a copy that favored them. They believed they could play the legal angles. They didn't count on my backups. Encrypted cloud copies, witnesses who didn't know they'd be witnesses, and a notary who kept proof of every signature. When the forgery was discovered, it wasn't just a loss of inheritance. The court papers, the news clippings, the social posts formed a tapestry of intent. Their attempt to cheat the cheat turned into the clearest proof of guilt. They had fought me for a house and found themselves fighting the law and their own conscience, with nothing left to gain and everything left to lose. The day I chose felt ordinary. Gray light, a thin drizzle that made the courthouse steps shine. But I had planned every detail until ordinary wouldn't do. I asked for a family meeting in the community room, then let the rumor mill and a few well-placed calls do the rest. A local reporter, a blogger with a taste for scandal, and one legal scholar curious about elder law loopholes. They came with cameras and notepads. My children came with trembling hands and rehearsed remorse. They stood under that harsh light, and I watched them shrink. Mark's jaw worked like a trapped animal. Lisa's mascara ran in soft black tracks. She kept wiping at it as if she could erase what she'd done. Evan looked hollow, like someone had scooped the center out of him and left the shell. They begged, in sentences that sounded small under the meter of public attention, "Please, Dad, we made mistakes. Please forgive me." Their voices were threaded with panic and calculation. Part apology, part legal defense. I had the room set up two ways, for private contrition and for public record. When they finished, I rose slowly and nodded. I told the reporter the family had agreed to a final statement, then pressed a button the size of a thumbnail. Speakers filled the room. The first clip was Mark, laughing as he signed a deed. The second was Lisa promising to handle the mortgage while pocketing the checks. The third was Evan with a phone to his ear whispering, "He won't remember. Don't worry about him." The recordings were plain and small. The banality of evil laid bare. For each clip I had added a caption, dates, receipts, times. The blogger's pen stuttered. The reporter's camera zoomed. The sound did something to them. Faces drained of color. A woman who'd once hosted their wedding stood up and left without a word. A friend in the crowd whispered into a phone, "You need to see this." Calls came like weather. One to Mark telling him his major client had pulled their contract. One to Lisa notifying her boutique of a pending fraud investigation. One to Evan that HR had placed a hold on his file pending inquiry. Phones in the room rang and rang, each ringing a small funeral bell. Then the legal papers arrived. A marshal quietly took Mark's passport. Someone from a prosecutor's office showed a subpoena. I had not desired blood, but I had not spared it either. Forgery charges, theft, conspiracy. The words landed like stones. But the last blow wasn't the subpoenas. It was the calendar I'd left on the table, a stack of stamped envelopes addressed to their homes, each labeled with a date, each bearing a note I'd written years ago saying I'd consider meeting them on that day. I had scheduled visits for the rest of their lives, holidays, birthdays, arbitrary Tuesdays. I had made them believe there would always be a tomorrow in which they could make amends. They tore the envelopes open in front of everyone, reading hope and humiliation at once. I watched their hands tremble as they realized the cruelty. Every promise I'd dangled was genuine enough to keep them alive with expectation, but conditional on things they could never wholly undo. I would accept none of their bargains without ceremony, and I had the patience to make them wait. A sound rose, a keening, half prayer, half rage. Mark collapsed to the floor and began to scream, a raw, animal sound that filled the room. Lisa's phone buzzed with another message. Her husband was gone. He'd taken their savings. Evan's shoulders crumpled as a woman who used to be his colleague turned away. Outside, cameras panned over faces, and the story began to taste like a headline. They had wanted to bury me. Instead, I had buried them in expectation. Waiting, I had learned, corrodes faster than any sentence. They would carry the ache of forgiveness for the rest of their days, a sentence with no end. Silence followed the storm. Not peace, but the kind of quiet that hums like static in the ears. The reporters left. The lawyers stopped calling. My children didn't. They still dialed, over and over. The nurses would bring me the phone, whisper, "It's your son again," and I'd shake my head. Sometimes I listened without speaking, breath catching as they begged through static. "Dad, please, just talk to us." I'd hang up before the word forgive finished forming. Weeks turned into months. Mark sent letters full of apologies written in a looping, desperate hand. Lisa mailed photographs of her children, drawing hearts on the backs. Evan recorded voice messages late at night, his voice hoarse as if confessing to ghosts. I kept every letter sealed, every photograph unopened, every voicemail unheard. That was my justice. Letting their remorse rot, sealed and airless. But revenge has its own gravity. The satisfaction dulled quicker than I expected. Meals tasted like paper. Laughter in the halls grated against something hollow inside me. I had won, but victory felt sterile, like an empty bed that's finally made. Then came the second twist, the one even I hadn't planned. The foundation that received my estate sent out its first newsletter. Across the top, bold letters read, "The Mary Foundation, established by Lisa Harlan." Her name, not mine. I'd willed it that way, a final humiliation, but seeing it in print made me hesitate. Donations poured in under her name, saving elderly residents from abuse, feeding the forgotten. People praised her kindness, and for the first time, I couldn't tell whether the irony was my triumph or my punishment, because every good deed done in her name would remind her, and me, of what she destroyed to earn it. Forgiveness had been my weapon, but in the end, it was also the wound I couldn't close. They waited. They died, waiting. And I learned that forgiveness isn't peace. It's power wrapped in silence. Now the phones don't ring anymore. The nurses say it's quiet, but I still hear echoes. The way Mark screamed, the way Lisa whispered my name like a prayer she no longer believed in. Every night, I replay it all. Not out of guilt, but out of habit. Justice has a sound, and it never really stops ringing. People ask if I regret it. Regret is for those who still need something from the world. I only needed time, and time has already given me everything. So tell me, if you were me, standing there with all that betrayal in your hands, would you have forgiven? Or would you have let them wait, just to feel the weight of what they did? If this story made you think, stay, hit subscribe, leave your answer below, and listen to the next one. Because not every revenge ends in blood. Some just end in silence.